in Kokomo, Indiana on November 4th, 1923. On D-Day, I was a member of the 496 Bomb Squadron, 344th Bomb Group, 99th Wing, 9th Bomber Command, 9th Air Force, U.S. Army Air Corps. During late May and early June, we were all aware that something big was coming off. Many of us thought of invasion. Black and white recognition stripes had been painted on our B-26s. About the 2nd of June, newsmen began moving into our base. In fact, we had a reporter from the Baltimore Sun quartered in our hut, but he did not fly with our crew. Actually, except for the stripes and the reporters, operations seemed to be normal. At 0100 hours on June 6th, I was sleeping soundly, only to be aroused by the OD at about 1:30 hours for the morning briefing. I haven't the slightest idea what I had for breakfast. As far as clothing, I wore what I usually wore to fly a combat sortie: a uniform shirt and trousers over my ball brigand pajamas, a flight suit over the uniform, plus an A2 jacket. I wore my Build 50 Mission Crush hat because a flak helmet fitted over it. I had on my brown riding boots. They wouldn't come off if we had to bail out, and my fleece-lined flying boots fitted better than with the GI boot. In-flight clothing of a sort was added: a Mae West flotation jacket, a parachute harness. I kept my chest pack on the radio operator's table, and over all this went a flak jacket, usually donned when airborne. The mission briefing took place at 0230 hours. One of the main points I vividly recall was the number of German aircraft that could be brought against us. But, not to worry, there would be 7,000 Allied airplanes in the air. The weather was ghastly: low clouds, drizzle, and fog. As I recall, we took off about 400 hours. The attempt to join up in proper formation was a mess. We missed the main formation and chased a group halfway across the channel, and as the sky brightened, we caught up with them and took a position that looked empty. I thought then, and still believe, that I was in the 13th Marauder to cross the beachhead, regardless of mission logs, group histories, and that sort of thing. The 344th Silver Streaks had been selected to lead all the other B-26 groups, so we were the first. Crossing the channel, it looked to me as if you could walk from ship to ship without getting your feet wet. As we neared the coast, we could see naval gunfire and some return fire. I remember a battleship of the Texas class with the basket upperworks firing the big guns. We were scheduled to be over the beach before the troops came ashore about 6:30 hours. Because of the low cloud deck, our bombing altitude was low, about 3,500 feet. We flew parallel to the shoreline and dropped our 250-pound bombs directly on the beach and in the sand. I thought to myself that we are digging foxholes and exploding mines. Sure enough, that is what we were supposed to be doing. Gunners and airplanes ahead of us were firing at the ground, although I could not see anything to shoot at. I tried to find something, though, but couldn't. Empty brass and machine gun links were falling around us from those airplanes, and I was afraid we might get damaged. I would not let my gunners fire, and that made them a little bit unhappy with me. After our drop, we made a sharp right turn and flew south and then west over the base of the Cherbourg Peninsula. On the ground, there were various colored parachutes everywhere. Gliders, or parts of gliders, were scattered all over. You could see where they'd gone through the hedgerows, leaving wings behind. Some had burnt, and some were still intact, although not many. Not far from the battle zone, a farmer was plowing his field. He had a white horse and was seemingly unconcerned about all that was happening around him. Would you call that savoir-faire? Because we were amongst the first aircraft to bomb, we did not receive the enemy opposition reported by following aircraft. I saw one ME-109, bright red. It flew at our altitude but stayed well away from the formation. As far as we were concerned, it was a milk run. The return to Stansted, 3 hours and 50 minutes later, was uneventful. Thus ended my 30th combat sortie. What were my thoughts? Was I frightened? Well, my thoughts were mostly about the poor bastards on the ground, and I was glad to be in the air. Did I think about the momentous happenings? I doubt it. Frightened? Not particularly. After all, I was a 20-year-old second lieutenant on combat status, flying in the best airplane and with the best crew, so what could happen? Our crew on that day was the same one that had been formed at Barksdale 6 months before, and we had flown most of our missions together. I finished my tour on 11 September 1944 with 67 combat sorties and 230 hours of combat time. Nearly 50 years later, I look back on my brief period with the silver streaks as amongst the most exciting days. I can say with pride, I was there. I was there with the best Marauder outfit in England, and I was there for the greatest invasion in history. Even though I was recalled for the Korean War and flew another 21 sorties in B-29s, nothing can compare to the days with the 344th.
I am Dr. Raymond Sanders of Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, and I am reporting this D-Day history on June 13th, 1991. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky on March 15th, 1914, and graduated from high school in June 1932. Following high school graduation, I found myself totally unemployed several times. Then I served 2 stints in the CCC. I worked my way through 1 year of study at the University of Iowa and also 1 year of study at the Chicago College of Osteopathy. Then on December 7th, 1941, I discontinued my studies and returned to Louisville, where I was registered for immediate enlistment in the Army. After basic training, I was sent to Scott Field at Belleville, Illinois, for 6 months of training in radio operation and radio mechanics. At the end of this period, I was sent to MacDill Field at Tampa, Florida, for bomber crew training in the Martin B-26 medium bomber. Then, within a month, I suffered a collapsed lung and had to be hospitalized for 2 months. On release from the hospital, I was unable to rejoin my group because I had missed too much training and was assigned to transition, which meant that I was not attached to any particular squadron or group. So from March to October 1943, I flew with whoever needed a radio operator or gunner, and this was when 1 a day in Tampa Bay was at its worst. Then, in late October 1943, I was transferred to the Lakeland, Florida Air Base, where the 344th Bomb Group was in advanced training. I was assigned to the 497th Squadron and became a member of Lieutenant Wilson's crew. The crew was made up of the pilot was Lieutenant Wilson, co-pilot Lieutenant Havener, bombardier Lieutenant Humes, navigator Lieutenant Preston, engineer gunner Sergeant Skalski, armorer gunner Sergeant Smith, and myself, the radio operator, Sergeant Sanders. In training, as well as in combat later on, there was very little need for the radio operator most of the time, so most of my flying time was in the waist as waist gunner, with my 2 50 caliber machine guns. And I might add, the view from the waist was one of the best of any other position in the plane, because I had a very good view of the air and the ground below us. The advanced training that we were doing included tight formation flying, bombing missions, navigation missions, gunnery missions, and the training missions where each man in our crew learned to improve his specific duties and to create a smooth working bomber team. We received orders to ship out in late November 1943, and we picked up our own B-26 in December, flew it to England by the way of South America and North Africa, and arrived at our English base, which was Stansted Field, in February 1944. We were now a part of the 9th Air Force, and were ready to go into action. We started bombing missions on March 6th in 1944, and within 2 months we were flying as many as 3 missions a day. By late May, we knew the invasion was imminent because of the buildup of the invasion vessels at England's coastal areas. We also knew at this time that our targets were vital communication centers for the enemy troops, and we expected D-Day to arrive at almost any moment. During the first few days in June, there was a lull in operations, followed by a quarantine of all personnel to the base. We were not unduly emotional or concerned. We had been expecting this for weeks, and we knew that it was coming, so we took it in stride, just as we had been performing our tasks during D-Day preparations. Late in the evening before D-Day, we were told that there would be a briefing at 200 hours. Of course, we knew this would be D-Day, so we went to bed early to try to get as much sleep as possible before the early briefing. When we were awakened at 2 a.m. and made our way to the briefing hut, we were glad that the long-expected day had arrived, and we felt some sort of relief. We were concerned, however, about the weather, because it had been cloudy and rainy for quite some time, and it now looked like it might get even worse. Of course, it was dark at this time of night, so we hoped that the weather might let up by takeoff time. When we arrived at the briefing hut, there was a slight shock in seeing the MPs at the door. We had never seen this before. But we assumed that security in this moment in time must be extremely tight, but it was a peculiar feeling being marshaled by our own police. Then when we entered the briefing room, the surprise was even much greater. At all previous briefings, the room had been well lighted, there was a huge map up at the center stage, and there were more than half a dozen briefing officers up front. Today, however, the room was only dimly lighted, and there was no map up front, and there were no briefing officers. But in a few minutes, Colonel Whitty, our deputy commander, calmly walked up front and just as calmly announced that he had a telegram to read to us. Then he pulled the telegram from his pocket and began reading. I do not remember the exact words, but it went something like this. Congratulations. Today you're going to see the biggest show on earth. It is expected that our losses will be light and that our victory, due in part to your fine performance, will be overwhelming. I wish you Godspeed on this noble crusade. Signed, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Forces. Then Colonel Whitty stated that only the pilots, bombardiers, and navigators had been briefed and knew where the target was located, and also had been given the flight plans and other significant information about the execution of this mission. He advised us that today our bomber group would send up every available plane. This meant that we usually sent up 2 boxes of 18 planes each, but today we would send up 3 boxes of 18 and any spares that were available. He also told us that there was a heavy rain over the channel, and it was expected to continue throughout the day, but there would be no abortions or cancellation of the mission, even if we had to go over on the deck. And then he told us that the Navy had orders to shoot any of us down if we got as much as 2 miles off course. He added that there would be no need for anybody to feel lonesome, because there would be 13,000 other Allied aircraft up there with us. Then he told us that during the night, the ground crews had painted black and white zebra stripes on the wings and fuselage of our 26s, as well as on all other Allied aircraft, so that it would be easy to identify friend from foe. The last thing that Colonel Whitty told us was that we would now go to our ships and wait there for takeoff instructions. When we left the briefing room, The MPs went with each crew to pick up our parachutes and flak suits, and then to our ships. The MPs stayed with us until we climbed aboard for our takeoff. This was the first time we had had MPs keeping an eye on us, but we knew that there were leaks somewhere around the field, and we were just as happy to know that none of us could run over to a telephone and alert the Germans. While we waited for takeoff instructions, our attitude was no different than it had been on any other tough mission. We knew that this mission had to be completed, no matter how dangerous things might become, and we accepted that. Many times in the past, we had seen our buddies disappear in an exploding B-26, or go down in flames, or try to survive by parachuting, and, like it or not, we had learned to accept our fate. But today, we figured that this mission would be a lot rougher than anything we'd ever seen in the past. We had been preparing for this for months, but somehow things just didn't seem real. We didn't see how we could possibly fly over the channel in all that rain and darkness without crashing into each other, and then find and destroy the target. We had been trained for just about everything except blind flying in the almost zero visibility. Everything seemed hopeless except for one magnificent demonstration of human attitude or behavior. It was that of the men. If I were asked to name the most outstanding impression I had on D-Day, it would definitely be the attitude of the men. We knew that they were greatly concerned about their chances of survival on this one, but they never let it interfere with their duties. And most of them managed to smile in the face of whatever might come. Then, before we knew it, we were racing down the runway for a takeoff, and I couldn't imagine how we could possibly see the other planes in order to fly our usual tight formation. It was now raining harder than ever, and even though it should have been light at this hour, the rain was so thick, visibility was almost non-existent. But we continued on our way at treetop level in order to see the ground or the channel. And when we got to the channel, we knew that Eisenhower was right. It was the biggest show on Earth. There were so many ships in the channel, it was hard to find water between or around them. The easiest way to describe it would be that they were packed into the channel like sardines. We were now up a little bit higher, perhaps up to 400 or 500 feet, and the rain had lightened up enough for us to see all the ships below. And then there were no more ships. This meant that we had outrun the Navy and that our job now was to go in and destroy the heavy guns so that the ships could approach the coast without facing such heavy fire. So on we went, just a few hundred feet above the channel. In what seemed no time at all, we crossed the coast and turned 90 degrees to the left in order to follow the coast to our landmark, which would locate the target for us. But just as soon as we reached the coast, we experienced the most withering fire we had ever seen. We were accustomed to heavy flak, but this was something else. Not only did we have heavy and accurate flak, but we also had light flak and many machine gun tracers coming up at us from the ground. We could even make out the machine gun nests. Then we also saw something else that we had never seen, and it was rockets coming down from out of the sky above us and passing through our formations to the ground below. We knew immediately that it was rocket fire from our own dive bombers. So now we had machine gun fire coming up from below and rocket fire coming down from above, and all this in addition to the intense flak. I actually said to myself out loud, I've never seen anything like this before. Then someone yelled on the intercom, "Sanders, there's a Focke-Wulf at 3 o'clock, get him!" I swung around to that position real fast, but I saw that it was only a P-47 in zebra stripes. but I sure couldn't blame anybody for being gun-happy on this day. Next, I heard the pilot's guns being fired in a long burst. He had never used them before except on our training flights, but I wasn't surprised at anything at this stage of the game. Someone asked what he was shooting at, and his reply was, "Everybody else is shooting, so I might just as well do it too." And then I saw the plane that was flying just behind us and to our left go down in flames. I don't remember if anyone got out or not because we were almost too low to have time for the chutes to open. The gunfire and flak was getting more intense at this time when all of a sudden I heard our ship sound like it was being blown or ripped to bits. The sound was much louder than anything I had ever heard and seemed to come from every surface of our ship. Before the terrible noise and the jolting had quit, I grabbed the intercom and yelled, "We've been hit!" And then our co-pilot, Lieutenant Havener, came back on the intercom and said, "No, we haven't been hit. That was our bombs going off." So I realized that we had been flying so low that our own bombs were almost close enough to rip us to pieces. But then, in just a few moments, things became peaceful and quiet. Looking down below, we could see the green fields of France. But the relief didn't last long because we also started to see smashed gliders with their invasion stripes. We saw hundreds of them, and it seemed like all of them had crashed on landing, and most of the crashes looked bad enough to have seriously injured the troops in them. This gave us a sickening feeling because it looked like a lot of our boys had met with a terrible disaster. And then we continued across the peninsula and then back to England, many miles away from the invasion beaches. We got back to our base in time to go to breakfast at 7:30, and while eating, the radio that had been tuned to the Armed Forces radio suddenly stopped the music and a voice said, "It has just been announced that Allied forces have landed on the French coast this morning." Then the music continued, and we continued our breakfast, knowing that for once we were aware of the news before the radio announced it, and that we had been part of that invasion force. We were alerted for a second mission to take place, and we stood by expecting one at any moment. And there was one more mission, but it was not a maximum effort, and I was not asked to go. However, the target, which was a German troop train, did not show up at the appointed place and time, so the two boxes of our group that did go on this mission destroyed the marshalling yards instead. So all day long we kept our ears glued to the radio for information about the success or failure of the invasion. The news was sketchy, with no clear-cut indications of success, so we felt terribly bad about our boys on the beaches. We had been there ourselves, and we knew that the storm could have wrecked the entire invasion plans. And it was several days before the press announced that the invasion was going well, so now we could turn our thoughts from the invasion to the complete destruction of Germany. And we also learned that we had totally destroyed our D-Day targets, and that seemed to somehow make us feel that our efforts had not been in vain.